expect me to try to create, how in the world can I get those materials just on my own? But I can install them on my own. And that's what I'm prepared to do. Now, granted, we want a long-term agreement on the railroad. And because I want to secure Conway Scenic's future for the long term. So I definitely appreciate your time and consideration. This is near and dear to my heart. That company, and I'll just share this one last little bit. So 51 years ago, I was a little boy on that platform. And my mom and dad, they were good folks, they were hardworking. During the day, they worked as accountants, and at night they tried to run my grandmother's farm. It wasn't a good business plan. So we were visiting up there, and we were looking at the old man in the mountain, and my dad picks up a brochure for Conway Scenic, and he said, "Hey, Dave, you want to go ride this new train?" So we drove over from the old man in the mountain, and we missed the last train of the day. Now, my mom and dad did not have money for a train ticket and a motel. They slept in the car with me that night so I could ride behind this railroad the next day. And then working hard, and I always had a great full-time job, and I always had like a machine shop on the side, like working on the side. And I was able to buy this railroad in 2018. And that's the American dream, and that's why I feel so strongly about this. So anyways, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
I got one question.
Yes, sir.
I worked in the factory, and we had to have a rail come into the factory.
Yes, sir.
It was a half a mile from the main line.
Yes.
It cost $1 million to put that in.
It's not cheap.
Yeah, okay. And that was a half a mile. You mentioned the dump. I don't know how far the dump is from the rail line, but
Throw a rock.
It's almost right
Throw a
on
rock, hit the dirt track.
It's on the property.
Yeah, it's right on it. And that's why, I look at this, when I look at properties, I look at where opportunities are. Now, obviously, we want to see, are there other developable properties that are along the line for other uses? Because what we'll do is we'll catalog those, and then we'll start marketing those for potential rail users. But when I saw that transfer station, I said to myself, there is the opportunity. Because what it's doing, when you think, step back a moment. So right now, I'm thinking of creating 2 of these facilities. One in Maine, one in New Hampshire. Now, that's my vision. We'll see how that plays out. In New Hampshire, there's a moratorium on landfill creation, which is great, except for when the landfill fills, there's no place to put it. That's that issue going on in my home state. In your home state, you've got this issue that the costs of trash are going up every year, and then you've got this PFAS issue. So when I look at an opportunity, if we create 2 of these facilities, so what happens, your town, if we create a facility there, gets revenue from that trash being put on those trains. That's a revenue source for you. Then also what interestingly happens is the state of Maine DOT gets a percentage of the freight move. So they earn money from it along with us. So it seems like a great solution. It helps your community, it helps both states with these larger, bigger issues, and obviously it's helping the railroad at the same time. Ma'am, did you have a question?
Yeah, how fast does this train go?
So here's the thing. Initially, we're just going to go like 10 miles an hour. Now, the reason for that is that I deal with reality, and the track needs to be better the faster you go. So you got to put more ties and you got to put more ballast in. Now, eventually the train will go faster, but we're going to start at 10 and then we're going to work our way up. And that's the thing, when you're not using public funds on gigantic scales, right? So when you talk to a big company, they're up here somewhere, right? Well, I'm this kind of person, right? So you got to deal with reality. And reality is you go slower, and then you slowly build the railroad into something that you want in the future. That's why initially we wouldn't run the tourist train here, because the track needs to be really, really nice for that.
I know, it's in my backyard.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So, I should mention that I was on the Rail Use Advisory Council, and we did have a whole process that was followed to study the various options for the rail and for potentially putting in a trail. So for the rail to be restored and go 10 miles an hour at the time, now this was 2 years ago, and for the rail to be restored up to 10 miles an hour would be $52 million. To go beyond that, restored for 25 miles per hour would be $60 million. You had talked about the possibility of a rail alongside the trail. That would cost $148 million after restoring the rail and putting in the trail. The feasibility study that was done showed what potential economic impact there would be with a trail being put down until it made sense to restore it to rail, if that should ever happen. And the economic feasibility was based on the Eastern Trail being expanded and the number of users and all of that, and found that the recreational value in a bike trail or a multi-use trail being put through the towns was $2.2 million per year. And that's because of the number of people who use it, and we've done trail counts to show how many people use it, what those people spend money on. And because of that, many of the businesses in the town of Brownfield wrote letters of support for the trail to be put in instead of the rail. So my question would be, what is the benefit to Brownfield and all the towns along this rail line? I understand the benefit to the Conway Scenic Railway, which I love, and I love trains, but for these towns along this line, what is the benefit for them? You mentioned our transfer station. We're the only transfer station that is near the rail for any of these line towns, which means they're not going to move their transfer station next to the rail. And you're talking about ideas of various businesses that could be profitable at some point, but those basically are ideas. There's no one committed to using a rail whatsoever. So it sounds like the expectation is that Maine taxpayers would be paying to restore this rail, and folks like you are going to have freight trains going through their backyard instead of a bike trail going through their backyard. Is that what you want? Do you want propane tanks and garbage trains going through your backyard when you could have a trail with people riding bikes, walking strollers, a safe place for people to ride bikes in town, which we don't have now? The Board of Selectmen have signed a letter supporting the trail. Over 200 letters of testimony were submitted. 97% of those said they wanted a trail, not a rail. Recently, 21 letters were sent just from people from Brownfield to support LD 676, establishing funding for this. Of those 21 letters, only 2 supported rail, all the rest wanted trail. So I just wanted to, what's that?
Can you have both?
Oh, yeah.
Well, to have both, it would cost $148 million. Those were the costs 2 years ago in the feasibility study.
I have one question.
There are also 23 water crossings, bridges along that route, so it's going to be environmentally disruptive and very expensive to try to put the
Who owns the
trail
property
inside.
now?
The Maine DOT,
The Maine DOT owns the railroad track.
yes.
Okay, so that's their property. So you would have to buy it from Maine DOT?
No, what we would do is we'd lease it long-term. And so, and that's, and at the end of the day, so that gives Maine DOT an opportunity to earn revenue long-term. So to your points, and there was a few of them there. So in relation to the cost of railroad rehabilitation, what happens with this, and not discrediting anyone, but when you have a big engineering firm come through, their price is going to be way up here because they don't look at it as an operating company would. An operating company just deals with reality. So what we're doing is I've got our staff and our consultants out there. They're walking the line and they're creating a bill of materials. So you have to start from somewhere. You don't want to just start from this pie in the sky kind of number, because if you do that, then you can't realistically achieve the goal of fixing the track. So we're gonna walk the railroad, we're gonna create a bill of materials, and then based on that bill of materials, then we'll go back to the guys down in Washington and say, listen, this is what we think this is gonna take. And again, there's no profitability built into that where I'm providing the services to install those materials. So that comes down at a much lower price point. I can't tell you what the number is right this second because we need to build a material. So that's the process that we're following. It's funny. Our engineer has been in the rail and bridge engineering business for, geez, over 20 years now, and he kind of has this thing that any fool can spend $150,000 fixing a $15,000 problem, and that's the reality of it. That when you look at a for-profit company, we use engineers that provide good solutions versus engineers that provide Taj Mahal solutions that are easy to figure out, but hard to pay for at the end of the day. As far as the trail with the rail, now, I can't really comment specifically on locations, but there is a mindset. If that's something that is really wanted, there's workarounds. You don't necessarily need to follow the right of way. If there's a water course or something where there's a fill, you can always go to a public grade crossing and then use the public right of way that is part of the street to get around that and get to the next public grade crossing. So there's other solutions to that. When we talk about economic impact, I know that Conway Scenic's economic impact is $40 million per year. Now, granted, we've been in business for 51 years, but when you look at that 40 million, it took me 6 years to increase that by $20 million a year. Now, that's not money I get, that's money that the communities get based on tourism. You know, when you go into the Cambria Hotel that was built brand new over in Conway, there's actually 3 hotels built in 1 year. You go to the Cambria, and there's a mural of Conway Scenic behind the front desk. Now, I don't own that hotel, but they recognize that, you know, we bring so much opportunity to the table. So, and when you also look at this whole thing with the trail, on a federal level as well as a state level, rail preservation is the ruling of the day. And trails can be built alongside or really anywhere. There's already thousands of miles of trails that pre-exist in Maine. And I'm not saying that a trail is a bad thing, but at the end of the day, you're building an infrastructure that is free to use to anyone. And you know, what I'm proposing here is infrastructure, especially if we did this transfer station that earns money for your community every year, as well as earning money for New Hampshire DOT or Maine DOT. So, and yes, of course I'm in there because, you know, we are a for-profit company and I have right now 76 families I have to support. So, so any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just like to say for information purposes, in March this year, they had March Main Sunday Telegram, March 9th, they do a comparison of what it costs to automobile costs with accidents and everything else, and they give an explanation of why rails and trails, you know, could be a good thing, why rails are a good thing to offset all the automobile transportation, the accidents, the cost of that. Lake Living, and I don't know when it was, so I think it was last year, did a thing, but they have a lot of history on the railroad in it, which is interesting, and information on the trail. And the other thing is Maine DOT, their program on it, they state in their program for the trail that any non-use rail use of the Mountain Division corridor will be considered interim in nature, and the corridor must be preserved for future trail use. So if you do rails to trails, it's sort of rails and trails. Then it sort of helps preserve it. But that's just informational if people are interested in it. But yeah, this was a real good article showing the real cost of automobiles. Actually, Maine is 5th highest in the country for automobile accidents. Believe it or not, it's the highest in New England. So, and it's compared to the world, it's really up there too.
Aren't we pulling up the trail?
I mean,
Are we pulling up the rail?
well, the rails probably have to be pulled up anyway because they're not usable, I don't think, from what I've heard.
Well,
But the thing is, they're putting the trail where the rails are, which maybe they could put the trail beside the rail. I don't, and they're paving it, which if they further convert it to rail use, then there's all that waste of the pavement. You know, there's thoughts that, you know, it makes it more handicap accessible, but there's Rachel Carson Wildlife Reserve in Wells, and that's all done with gravel dust. And they actually have wheelchair tours in there. So you don't have to pave it for wheelchairs, but, and if they don't pave the trail, also including Freiburg, they would have saved 7.3 million if they didn't pave it as opposed to dust, according to DOT. But anyway, you know, rails and trails is a feasible thing economically, if people are interested in doing it that way and for all the safety issues,
But I think one thing that's important to mention too is that the rail itself being there facilitates the use of automated equipment to fix the track. If the rail's not there, you're starting from scratch, and then you will spend a pile of money because it's just the way it works. Like, you know, all the machines that we have, even at our level, they need the rail to ride on in order to put new ties in or to camp or do all that. Now, that doesn't mean that at some point in the future the rail's not changed out. Where we run now, we change rail, you know, every year. But again, it's a process. It doesn't have to immediately happen. Any other questions? Yes.
Do you talk to the people before you're gonna, like, I would want a fence up next to, near me if you were gonna put a train going down there. Is that something you talk to people that are close to the train?
So, in reference to fences, I'm not sure what the current situation is. I know that back in the day, roads had fences, but are they still in existence? I'm not sure. So I think we'd have to cross that bridge when we get to it, especially, you know, if you've got livestock or something.
I have a dog and that's my concern.
Yes, ma'am.
So I did want to mention that the trail alongside the rail sounds like a great idea, but it costs 7 times more than just putting a trail down. And there is a feasibility study that you can go online and look over, and an engineering study is the next step. And what the Maine DOT would do would decide where fences would be important or necessary based on residents' needs and also issues like you know, drop-offs and so forth to be safe for people using the trail.
Why would it cost 7 times more just because you put it by a railroad track?
To restore the rail would cost,
No, he's talking about doing that himself. You were talking about the
no,
trail.
he's talking about doing part of it
A
himself.
lot of it.
Yeah, but it would cost 52 million to restore the rail, and then on top of that, to build the trail, it's another 70, 80 million to build the trail alongside, because you're building a whole separate infrastructure if you're putting a trail in alongside the rail.
But, you know, the Freiburg Trail, and I don't know why, if anybody knows, that has a rail right alongside it.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why that rail still is there? or-
I can tell you why it's still there. So
Uh-huh.
that was the easiest part of the route to do, because there are no water crossings and there's enough space to put the trail in alongside the rail. So people were happy to do that. This is a whole different story, from Freiburg all the way down to Wyndham. I mean, just think about that land going through there. There's all kinds of ponds and water crossings and places where the rail is right next to the road. It's a whole different story, and this is the most expensive part that would be done, because for all that reason.
Yeah, I just wondered why it was there.
Yep.
But I mean, it seems like it's been recent, I mean, it doesn't look like as bad a shape as what's in Brownfield, the rails. I don't know if anybody worked on it, but it's just curious.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Isn't it true, like, they're also grandfathered in, so in the future, our future generations would be accountable for the funds in the future when we might not have an individual with a machine shop and all the means to help make this happen anyways? Well, it's, Rick Bennett told us our towns, all the communities along the way have enough time to clear this up with the Rails to Trails Committee as well, and the DOT and everybody, to clear this up and get on board, get these fences on their property and everything beforehand through the Rails to Trails, and they could collaborate with somebody like this coming to our community to help us out, because we're the first town on this Rails to Trails program since Rick Bennett came to town and told us the project's starting here in Brownfield.
Well, the other thing is, once the state's done building the trails, they turn over the maintenance responsibility to the towns.
And that's what I'm gonna
So, I mean,
ask
if you have a
next.
rail going with it, maybe the rail would maintain some of the.
That's what I wanted to ask next, if we could
Yeah, I don't know, I don't
communicate
know.
with an outside entity or whatever language it is of getting on board to acknowledge native species and everything, and a permaculture design to attend to what most of these communities are worried about, the upkeep of the trail, you know? If an outside entity or person was willing to fundraise and get ahead of that, so that the communities like Brownfield, we're the first town that would have to spend money if we don't have to make our taxpayers pay for it, you see what I'm saying, and then lower their taxes because they're now on the property and weren't planning for this, and they're on the rail. Now their taxes, unless they're tied into making money off the trail, they don't pay hardly any taxes because they're now didn't decide to be having a rail behind them like that, you know, or a walking path too. Some people don't want the walking path, but the reality is the rails have a priority and they're established and part of our history before the trail. The trail would never be there if it weren't for the rails.